My name is Margaret Helen Whitmore, and I turned 70 last Thursday. That morning, as I stood at the kitchen sink rinsing a mug, the window above the basin caught the pale peach sky breaking into soft color. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant buzz of the highway a few blocks down. The same sounds I woke to every day since I moved into my son Daniel's home nearly 8 years ago, after Harold died. Harold was my husband, a modest, decent man, a quiet accountant who adored tending to his rose bushes and collected antique watches that no one ever wound anymore. When he passed, the house we built our lives in became too large for one and too heavy with memory. Daniel had said, "Come stay with us, Mom. We'll make space." And I did. I moved in with one suitcase and 2 boxes of linens. The rest, the photo albums, Harold's books, the old crockery with tiny chips on the rims, I packed away in storage. I remember Daniel's wife, Jenna, smiling awkwardly that day. "Just until you feel settled," she said. She was always polite, with the sort of kindness that came pre-measured. We carved out a space in the den, moved the desk and printer to the garage, and placed my bed under the window that faced the neighbor's brick wall. No one said it aloud, but I knew I was to keep small. I understood. They had 2 kids under 10, a mortgage, and work deadlines. I did my best to fit in like furniture that doesn't clash. I cooked when I could. Jenna preferred to meal prep on Sundays, so I stuck to weekday lunches. I folded laundry, not just my own. I drove carpool when the sitter canceled. I didn't ask for anything. When my granddaughter, Lily, fell off her bike, I was the one who picked gravel from her knees. When Henry had night terrors, I was the voice that hummed lullabies while Jenna wept in the hallway. I remember thinking, maybe this is motherhood twice removed. Silent, supportive, dispensable. I never voiced resentment. I was grateful, truly, but gratitude, when stretched too far, begins to resemble obligation. My presence was always helpful, but never needed. I was told when I was allowed to join outings. Jenna made the call if it would be too much for the kids. If I wasn't asked, I stayed home. On holidays, I made myself useful in the kitchen. I peeled potatoes in silence while Jenna stirred cranberry sauce. She often forgot to ask me to sit at the table until the plates were already served. Daniel would then look up with his familiar delayed warmth and say, "Mom, grab a chair." I told myself, this is just how modern families are. Everyone busy, everyone tired, no harm meant. And perhaps that's true. But last Thursday, on the morning of my 70th birthday, I woke early like always. I pressed the blue cardigan, the one Harold once said made my eyes look like the sea at dusk. I curled my hair, even sprayed it with a faint mist of lavender water. I don't remember the last time I dressed for a day like it meant something. But 70? That felt like a page worth marking. When Jenna came down at 8, she was already typing on her phone. "Oh, happy birthday, Margaret," she said, and kissed the air near my cheek. Lily handed me a card she had clearly made in the car ride home the day before, pink markers still wet in the corners. Henry grinned and went back to his cereal. Daniel was in meetings all day. I made my own toast. That night, they said we'd have a quiet evening. They ordered Thai food. I don't eat spicy, but I smiled and ate the rice. They gave me an envelope. Inside was a $50 gift card to a department store I no longer shopped at. Lily started to sing, something about 70 years young, but Jenna stopped her. "Later, sweetie. Grandma's probably tired." I wasn't tired. At 9 p.m., they turned off the living room lights. I stood for a moment, alone in the hallway. Then I went to my room, turned on the small lamp by the bed, and sat. I could hear the muffled voices of Daniel and Jenna downstairs. A show was playing. Some canned laughter rose through the vents. I lay back, fully dressed, cardigan still buttoned, and stared at the ceiling. My birthday had passed like a ripple in shallow water. I had turned 70 in the house I lived in, but where I had not truly been for a very long time. And that, I think, was the night I disappeared. Not loudly, not with drama, but inside, I quietly stood up from the invisible chair they'd kept me in for years, and I didn't sit back down. The next morning, I awoke before the sun, as I always did. The curtains in my little den room swayed faintly in the draft from the vent, and the digital clock on the dresser glowed, 6:14. My slippers found the floor out of habit, and I padded down the hallway in the hush of a still sleeping house. I brewed the coffee Jenna liked, half calf, with a splash of almond milk. I didn't drink it, but I knew she appreciated the effort. Daniel's travel mug was already set out. I filled it without a sound. I toasted an English muffin for Henry and peeled a clementine for Lily's lunchbox. It was my 70th birthday. I wasn't expecting a parade. I had no illusions of surprise parties or tearful toasts. Those belonged to the stories other women told, the ones with friends who called and sisters who visited. I hadn't had either in years. But somewhere, in the quiet space I had carved for myself in this house, I believed there might be acknowledgement. Maybe a bouquet, maybe a simple breakfast, maybe a, let's sit down, Mom. Instead, Daniel came into the kitchen halfway through my muffin. He gave me a distracted smile, phone in hand, already scanning his calendar. "Oh, happy birthday, Mom," he said, kissing the top of my head. "Can't believe it's 70 already." "Neither can I replied with a chuckle, but it didn't quite reach the air. He grabbed his mug, muttered something about a 9 a.m. meeting, and disappeared out the door. Jenna came down next. She was in yoga pants and a ponytail, earbuds already in one ear. "Happy birthday, Margaret," she said, pulling out a small envelope from her purse. "From us, a little something." Inside was a $50 gift card to a department store, the kind I had stopped shopping at years ago. My fingers traced the plastic edge. I looked up, smiled, thanked her. She had already begun unloading the dishwasher. Henry and Lily came downstairs just before the school bus. Lily handed me a folded piece of pink construction paper, the corners a little crushed. Inside, she had drawn a picture of me, smiling, holding a balloon. It said, "To my grandma, 70 is the best age." I kissed her forehead. "It's the best because you made me this." Henry, shy as always, gave me a side hug. Then, backpacks swung onto shoulders, shoes stomped on, and the morning swept them out the door. I stood for a while in the kitchen. The clock read 8:13. The sink was clean. The silence was immense. The day passed in increments of tasks: laundry, grocery checklists, tidying the hall closet. No one called. No visitors came. Even the florist's van, which sometimes confused our house with the one across the street, didn't appear. Dinner came with little fanfare. Jenna didn't cook that night. She said, "Let's keep it easy. It's your birthday." She tapped at her phone and ordered Thai. I didn't care for spicy food, but I didn't say anything. I didn't want anyone to think I was being difficult. They gathered in the living room around 7. We ate from cartons. I sat on the corner of the sectional, the low table cutting into my knees. Daniel asked about a documentary I once mentioned. I said I hadn't seen it yet. He nodded, already looking at his watch. At one point, Lily stood and cleared her throat. "I want to sing for Grandma." Jenna looked up quickly. "Later, sweetheart. Grandma must be tired." Lily sat down. No one asked if I was tired. No one saw that I was holding back tears. By 8:45, the room thinned. Henry was already in pajamas. Jenna began gathering plates. Daniel turned on a sitcom. At exactly 9 o'clock, Jenna stood and flicked the wall switch. "Let's turn in early. Everyone's got a big day tomorrow." The room dimmed. I stood by the hallway for a moment, then walked slowly to my room. There was no cake, no candle, no photo, no mention of how many years I had held this family in my palms, stitched their lives with thread I kept quiet about. I sat on the edge of my bed, still in the blue cardigan. Downstairs, the television murmured through the floorboards. Laughter, canned, distant, rose up through the silence like smoke. I did not cry. I did not curse. Instead, I lay down, hands folded on my stomach. I closed my eyes, and I began to let go. The morning after my birthday began like any other, and that was precisely what hollowed me out most. The sunlight slanted through the blinds in even stripes. The air felt cool and indifferent, and the soft mechanical sigh of the furnace echoed faintly below the floor. No trace remained of the previous day, no evidence that any occasion had occurred at all. My 70th year had slipped in like an unnoticed guest, barely acknowledged, certainly not celebrated. I opened my eyes and lay there in the hush. The house, at that hour, was still. I could sense Daniel's familiar footsteps above me. He always started his morning earlier on Fridays, and the soft murmur of the coffee maker sputtering to life in the kitchen. But I remained in bed longer than usual, not out of weariness, not even sadness exactly. Something else had begun to form inside me, like a tide shifting before the ocean understands the wind has changed. At 6:30, I pushed myself upright and slid into my robe. The floor felt cold. I made the bed with careful, practiced hands. I smoothed the blanket and tucked the corners, just as I'd done in the years when Harold and I still shared mornings. Down the hall, the kitchen lights were on. Jenna was seated at the counter, AirPods in, nodding at something on her screen while sipping her coffee. She barely noticed when I walked in. "Morning," I said. She looked up distractedly. "Morning, Margaret." Then back to her laptop. I filled the kettle and set it on the stove. My movements were measured. I wasn't angry, not in the way that crackles and bursts. No, this was something deeper, slower, a sediment of realization settling into the corners of my consciousness. I drank my tea alone at the small table, the one pushed against the side wall, the one we never used when the full family ate together. My place in the home had long been defined not by invitation, but by necessity. Helpful, silent, peripheral. No one had meant harm, but that didn't mean no harm had occurred. Later that morning, when Jenna came back through the kitchen in workout clothes, she gave me a vague smile. "Daniel said he might pick up dinner tonight. Want anything?" "Don't trouble yourself," I said. "I'm thinking I might make something light." "Oh, okay." She paused. "Everything okay?" I turned from the sink and looked at her. Really looked. Jenna was a practical woman, capable and tidy, with her hair pulled into the same ponytail she wore every weekday. In that moment, she seemed so young to me. Not in age, necessarily. She was nearing 40, but in her inability to see anything she wasn't directly looking at. "Yes," I said after a moment. "Everything's fine." She nodded, satisfied, and left to go jogging. The front door clicked behind her. I was alone again. I washed the dishes slowly, the sponge creaking against the porcelain. The soap bubbles burst one by one. By mid-morning, I was in my room, sorting a drawer I had already sorted last week. Socks, scarves. One of Harold's old cufflinks had made its way into the back corner. I held it in my hand for a long time. I thought about how long I had lived this way, invisible, useful, present without being present. When Daniel had asked me to move in, he had meant well. I don't doubt that. But what had started as a stopgap, a temporary refuge for a grieving widow, had calcified into permanence without ever being reevaluated. They hadn't asked what I wanted, and I had not spoken up, not really, because to complain felt ungrateful, and to request something for myself felt indulgent. And so I faded, inch by inch, year by year, until yesterday, until the lights were turned off at 9, and I sat in the dark room, fully dressed, wondering whether 70 years of giving had earned me so little as a shared slice of cake. I stood in the center of the room, holding Harold's cufflink, and made a decision. By noon, I had retrieved my old suitcase, the blue Samsonite with a missing zipper tab, from the top shelf of the hallway closet. I laid it open on my bed. I packed carefully: 3 blouses, a pair of slacks, my walking shoes, a paperback I'd never finished, a photograph of Harold and me, taken during our honeymoon in Charleston. He had a sunburn and I wore a floppy hat. I placed my passport in the front pocket, then took a moment to write down the address of a small hotel I remembered from years ago. I looked it up online, and to my quiet astonishment, it still existed. I reserved a room for 6 nights. The clerk's voice on the phone was warm. I gave her my name, not Grandma or Mom or Margaret from the guest room, just Margaret Whitmore. I turned off my phone, not off entirely, just to silent. No vibration, no alerts, no pings from the family group chat. At 3:10 p.m., after the house had gone still again, I wheeled my suitcase down the walkway and hailed a cab at the corner. The driver was chatty. I let him talk. He asked if I was heading to visit family. I smiled and said, "No, just myself." I boarded the intercity bus at the Greyhound terminal just past 4. The seats were half full. No one looked at me twice. I watched the world peel past through the window: strip malls, gas stations, then the slow unfurling of open road. The bus rocked me gently, and I felt myself exhale. For the first time in years, I wasn't rushing back from a store. I wasn't holding a child's hand. I wasn't making a list in my head. I was gone, not forever, not in anger, but in decision. And I didn't leave a note. The hotel room was small but clean. There were fresh white sheets and a tiny balcony with chipped paint. The woman at the desk said they had just renovated the lobby. I set down my suitcase, opened the window, and stood still. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't check messages. I didn't think about what they might be saying. Instead, I took off my shoes, sat cross-legged on the bed, and allowed myself to be exactly where I was. The next few days unfolded like an unfurling bloom. I walked to the waterfront each morning and sat on a bench near the pier. I watched seagulls and teenagers flirting and old men casting fishing lines with more hope than skill. I wandered into antique shops. I ordered wine with lunch. I smiled at strangers and told them I was on a small holiday. I didn't say what I was escaping. I didn't need to. On the third day, I bought embroidery floss from a small crafts shop and sat in the park with a hoop in my lap. I hadn't stitched in years. My fingers remembered. The rhythm was slow, deliberate, a conversation between me and the fabric. No one from home called. Perhaps they hadn't noticed I was gone. Or perhaps they had and decided that was the end of it. Either way, I didn't miss the silence. In the evenings, I ordered room service. I watched the light dim on the water. I wrote postcards I didn't send. I was not angry. I had simply chosen something else. By the 6th morning, I knew I would return. But not as I had been. Something had shifted, not just in the fabric of my routine, but in the architecture of how I saw myself. I had lived decades as a caregiver, a wife, a mother, a helper. But now, at 70, I wanted to see who I was without all the doing. At the bus station, I hesitated before boarding, not because I was uncertain, but because I wanted to mark the moment. I boarded, I rode, and by the time the city limits appeared again, I felt like a visitor, not to a place, but to a former version of myself. It was late afternoon when I arrived back at the neighborhood. I walked up the sidewalk, dragging the suitcase behind me. I reached the gate. It didn't open. The key, the one I had kept in the front pocket of my purse for years, no longer fit. Confused, I checked the doormat. Nothing. The small plastic hideaway key was gone. I moved to the front window. The curtains were different, a soft gray instead of the old striped ones I had hung 2 Christmases ago. I pressed my hand against the glass and peered inside. The living room had changed. The children's toys had been moved. A new sofa stood in place of the one I used to drape blankets over each morning. A new lamp, too, sleek, modern. I stepped back. The house was still, and yet it was not mine. I knocked. Jenna answered. She blinked in surprise. Margaret? Yes, I said calmly. We, we didn't know what happened. You just left. I nodded. We thought maybe you weren't coming back. We had to reorganize. I glanced past her into the hallway. Even the rug was new. It's amazing how fast, she added, her voice trailing. How fast things change. Yes, I said. It is. I didn't ask to come in, and she didn't invite me. Daniel came to the door a few minutes later. His eyes searched mine. We thought you were upset, that you left because of your birthday. I shook my head. No, Daniel. I left because I realized I had stopped being seen. He opened his mouth, closed it, then nodded slowly. We sat on the porch bench. I sipped water from a bottle I had in my bag. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. I didn't realize, he said. I know, I replied. Inside, someone was laughing. The TV was on again. We talked for a while. No tears, just clarity. I told him I had found a place to rent, a friend's guest flat, a short drive away. Enough space for a table, a lamp, and quiet. He offered to help me move in. I thanked him but declined. I left that porch with my suitcase and my silence, and as I turned the corner, I felt neither victory nor bitterness, just peace. I had not slammed a door. I had simply chosen not to return to a room I no longer belonged in. The walk from Daniel's porch to the corner felt longer than it ever had. My suitcase rattled over uneven sidewalk cracks, its worn wheels catching against tree roots that had slowly lifted the concrete over years of unnoticed growth. Much like myself, I thought, quietly shifting beneath the surface until one day the cracks were visible. I didn't look back, not at the house, not at the curtains, not at the porch where he'd sat. Not because I was angry, but because I no longer needed to. That part of my life was no longer mine to tend. I arrived at the small guest flat on the edge of town just before dusk. The key was under a planter, just as my friend Louise had promised. She was wintering in Florida and had offered the space for as long as I needed it. I had texted her once, vaguely, from the hotel, something about needing a change of scene, and she'd replied with warmth and discretion. No questions, just a door left open. The flat had one bedroom, one window, and one round table near the kitchenette. A small lamp stood beside a modest armchair in the corner. The place smelled faintly of lemon and old books. I unpacked in silence, folded clothes into the drawers, placed my embroidery hoop on the table. I filled a bowl with apples. I turned on the lamp. No one interrupted. No one asked if I was doing laundry, or babysitting, or planning dinner. The absence of obligation settled around me not as loneliness, but as stillness, a kind of welcome hush. That night, I sat in the armchair and opened the paperback I had brought. The words felt slower now, less rushed. I read for an hour without checking the time. I made myself tea. I let the cup grow warm in my palms. At exactly 9 p.m., I stood up. Not because the lights had been turned off, not because anyone had said the day was done, simply because I was tired. I climbed into bed, a modest frame with cotton sheets, and slept without interruption. The next morning, I rose early. The habit still clung to me, but without the sharpness of necessity. I brewed coffee and drank it slowly by the window. Outside, the neighbor's dog barked at a squirrel. A boy rode past on a scooter. I was no longer inside the rhythm of someone else's home, but my own, however small. By noon, I had walked to the corner store and bought groceries, bread, butter, eggs, a small jar of strawberry jam. On a whim, I picked out a postcard from the rotating rack near the counter. It had a faded image of a lighthouse. I didn't write it, not yet, but I placed it on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a ladybug. Later that afternoon, I sat down with my embroidery. I chose a pattern I'd once started for Lily, a row of wildflowers, but never finished. My hands remembered the motion, the push of the needle, the slight resistance of cotton. I didn't listen to music or turn on the news. I simply stitched. For days, I repeated this rhythm: walks, reading, the slow making of small meals, a bath in the evening, sleep without schedules. I did not check my phone, though I saw the notifications building up like unopened envelopes in a forgotten drawer. And I did not feel guilt, not anymore, because something had changed, not just around me, but within. For years, I had calibrated myself to others' needs, shrinking where they needed space, pausing where they moved forward, speaking when silence was safer. But now I was learning the contours of my own time. One morning, I walked into the park nearby. It was late April and the trees were just beginning to stretch into full green. I sat on a bench near the duck pond and watched the surface ripple under the breeze. A woman beside me, perhaps a few years younger, was knitting a scarf. She looked over and smiled. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" "It is," I replied. We didn't say much after that. We sat in companionable silence, two women who understood the value of shared quiet. When she left, she patted my shoulder gently. "Enjoy it." I did. At some point that week, I wrote a single sentence on the back of the postcard: 70 is just the beginning. Then I pinned it to the refrigerator. I wasn't sure yet what it was the beginning of, but I knew what it was the end of: waiting, waiting to be remembered, to be needed, to be appreciated on terms that never belonged to me. I had decided not to disappear in a dramatic gesture, but in the most radical way possible, by living a life that no longer depended on being seen to be valuable. The phone rang once that afternoon, then again the next. I didn't answer. If they needed to find me, they would, but I would no longer be the one to ring the doorbell to my own life. Let them notice, or not. The first morning in my own place, truly my own, was cool and hushed. I woke not to the buzz of a schedule, not to anyone's alarm or rushing or clatter in the kitchen. There were no footsteps above me, no doors opening down the hall, only the faint sound of a bird outside and the ticking of the wall clock Louise had left above the window. I stayed in bed for a full hour, not because I was tired, but because I could. I watched the shadows shift on the ceiling, felt the weight of the blanket against my legs, and listened to the quiet, the simple luxury of stillness. I hadn't known how much I had longed for that. Eventually, I made my way to the kitchenette and brewed a small pot of coffee. Real coffee, not half-calf, not almond milk. Just strong, dark roast with a splash of cream. The mug felt warm in my hands as I stepped outside onto the small porch. The morning light filtered through the trees and turned the grass gold. Across the street, a boy chased a dog with a neon frisbee. A woman walked past with a grocery tote and a determined expression. No one knew who I was here. No one expected anything from me. That day, I decided to do nothing with purpose. I didn't clean. I didn't organize. I didn't plan. I left the dishes in the sink and pulled on my most comfortable shoes. I took a long walk, winding past unfamiliar blocks and low brick homes, nodding at the strangers I passed. A few smiled back. Some didn't. It didn't matter. I found a used bookstore tucked between a florist and a nail salon. Inside, the air smelled of old pages and quiet. A cat slept curled on the counter. I browsed slowly, letting my fingers trace the spines. I picked up a memoir I had meant to read for years. A woman who had hiked the Pacific Crest Trail alone in her 50s. I admired her, suddenly, in a different way. From there, I wandered into a cafe next door. No one rushed me. I took a seat by the window, ordered a cappuccino and a pear tart, and watched the world move. The sun moved across the glass and warmed my shoulder. I took out a small notebook and began to write. Not a letter, not a journal, just phrases, thoughts, lines that floated to the surface now that there was space for them. Things grow in the quiet. Presence is not the same as inclusion. I am not lost. I am simply elsewhere. That became the rhythm of my days. I walked. I read. I wrote. I cooked small meals. I bought a plant from the market and named it Greta. I embroidered until my fingers tingled. I spent long afternoons on the bench at the pond, watching ducks glide and clouds gather. Sometimes I thought of the children, not with sorrow, just memory. I wondered if Lily had sung her song anyway, if Henry still liked strawberry milk. I thought of Daniel, of how tired he always looked, and how little he saw of the home around him. But I didn't ache to return. Once, at a farmer's market, I saw a woman who looked like Jenna from behind. Same posture, same swing of the arms. My breath caught. But the woman turned and she was someone else. Younger, warmer eyes, a cardigan with embroidered daisies. I smiled at her. She smiled back, just that. Some evenings I lit a candle for no reason. I placed it on the porch table, sat in my chair with a blanket over my knees, and watched the flame flutter. No celebrations, no ceremonies, just light in the dark. A week passed, then two. Daniel texted once, "Hope you're well. Kids say hi." I didn't reply right away. When I did, I simply wrote, "I'm fine. Hope you all are too." There was no second message, and I realized something then, something that settled around me with neither pain nor joy, but with a kind of resignation. My absence had created a space, and no one had rushed to fill it. I was not irreplaceable, but I was missed in a quiet, undemanding way, like a coat hung by the door no longer needed for this season. That thought didn't wound me, it freed me. In the corner of the living room, I placed the photo of Harold and me, the one from Charleston. I looked younger then, but not necessarily more certain. He would have understood this version of me. He would have said, "It's about time." And I would have nodded. One night, I returned to the same bench in the park with my candle. I placed it gently on the wood and lit the wick. A man walking his dog passed by and asked, "Whose birthday?" I smiled. "Someone who isn't waiting for an invitation anymore." He tilted his head, nodded once, and walked on. I sat in the stillness, watching the light flicker against the gathering dark. No songs, no cake, just me. And that, for the first time in years, was enough. It was a Thursday afternoon, almost 3 weeks since I had walked away from Daniel's house, with nothing but my suitcase and my silence. The skies had turned soft and gray, and a mist clung lightly to the edges of the pavement as I waited at the stoplight across from the grocery store. In my canvas bag were a head of romaine, a small jar of jam, and a box of tea I liked. Not the kind Jenna bought. I wasn't planning to go back. Not in the traditional sense. There was nothing for me to reclaim. No room waiting, no chair saved at the table. But something inside me stirred with curiosity, not nostalgia. I wanted to see it again, like one walks past a childhood home not to enter, but to understand the distance. So on the following Monday, I called a car service, not Daniel, not Jenna, and asked to be dropped off near the corner of Maple and Laurel. I didn't bring anything but my purse and a scarf tucked around my shoulders. I didn't rehearse what I'd say. I didn't know if I would knock. As we turned down their street, I felt something tighten in my chest. Not fear, but recognition. The house came into view, still the same beige siding, though now there were flower boxes under the windows. Neatly arranged, precise, not mine. I stepped out and stood across the street, just looking. The front lawn had been re-sodded. A new swing hung from the tree, one Harold had planted decades ago when Daniel was a toddler. There were no fingerprints of me left in the garden beds. I walked slowly toward the driveway, my feet moving before I told them to. The porch light was off, but I could hear the TV inside. Someone was home. I knocked. It took a moment. Then the door opened halfway. Jenna stood there, in casual slacks and a soft blue blouse. Her face registered shock, and then something else. Uncertainty. "Margaret," she said. "Hi." "Hello, Jenna." She didn't open the door further. She didn't ask me in. "We didn't know if, you've been gone." "I have," I said, "and I'm not here to move back in. I just," I paused. "I just wanted to see the house." She shifted, unsure. "Well, it's here." "I see that," I said gently. "It looks different." She nodded. "We made some changes. It made sense." "I'm sure it did." An awkward silence stretched between us. I took it as a sign to step back. But then she said, "Daniel's home. Do you want to see him?" "If he wants to." She turned and disappeared into the house. The door remained half open. I could hear muffled voices, then footsteps. Daniel came to the doorway. His face looked older, not tired, not in the way he had once been, but slightly worn, as though something had shifted since I'd left. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, Daniel." He stepped out and closed the door behind him. We stood side by side on the porch, just as we had that last time, though now the bench was gone. A potted fern sat in its place. "I wasn't sure if you'd ever come back." "I wasn't sure either," I said, "but I didn't come to stay. Just to see, just to understand." He looked down at his shoes. "It's been strange without you." I smiled faintly. "Not impossible, though." Not impossible. We sat on the steps, because there was nowhere else. I placed my bag beside me and folded my hands in my lap. "I've been renting a place," I said, "near Rosewood Park." "That's a nice area." "It is, quiet." He looked at me. "Are you okay?" I held his gaze. "I'm learning to be." He nodded. "I'm sorry for not noticing, for letting things get that far." "I know you didn't mean to," I said, "but silence has a weight. It accumulates." The door creaked behind us. Lily peeked out. Her face lit up. "Grandma!" She ran forward and threw her arms around me. I hugged her back, felt her warmth press against mine. A sudden rush of old sweetness. "I missed you," she said into my shoulder. "I missed you too, darling." Jenna's voice called gently from inside. "Lily, come on, let Grandma talk." "It's okay," I said. "Let her stay a moment." Daniel stood and opened the door for her. Lily turned and ran inside. I stood too. "I should go," I said. He nodded. "Will we see you again?" "Maybe," I said, "but not like before." He didn't ask what that meant. I think he knew. As I walked down the sidewalk, I felt no ache, only closure, only distance earned. Back home, I made tea and placed a second chair across from mine, not for anyone, just in case. Then I took out a card from the drawer. It had a lighthouse on the front. Inside, I wrote, "Thank you for letting go when I needed it most." I didn't sign it. I slipped it into an envelope and left it unsealed. Some things are meant to be sent. Others are meant to be written and kept. This one I placed in my nightstand and let it be. The next day, I received a message from Daniel. It was short, polite, a little hesitant. "Thank you for coming by, Mom. It meant a lot to Lily. Let us know if you want to come for dinner sometime." I read it twice, then locked my phone and set it face down on the kitchen table. I didn't respond right away. I wasn't sure I would. There was no malice in the message, only uncertainty. It read like someone reaching through fog, not knowing whether to open the door or close it gently. I felt no anger, only a muted warmth, and the sharp awareness of how far I'd come since they last looked directly at me. For years, my presence in their house had been functional. My absence now seemed decorative, something they'd dust off for birthdays, holidays, or when the children asked. It didn't hurt, not exactly, but it didn't pull me back either. In the following days, I heard nothing more, and that, too, was an answer. The days settled back into their rhythm, mornings with toast and quiet, afternoons at the park, embroidery, grocery runs, a weekly coffee at the same table by the window. I joined a senior watercolor group that met every Thursday in the library basement. I wasn't very good, but no one was. And that, I discovered, was the point. One afternoon, I passed by a bulletin board with a flyer about a reading group. Memoirs of Older Women, Writing Life's Third Act. I pulled a tab from the bottom and tucked it into my planner. That evening, I lit a candle and sat by the open window. The air was warm. In the distance, wind chimes echoed faintly. I found myself thinking of Lily, of her small, determined voice, the way she had wrapped her arms around me so easily. She hadn't hesitated. I wrote her a letter, not a long one, just enough. Dear Lily, thank you for your hug on the porch. It was the best birthday gift I didn't get that day. I'm doing well, and I hope you are too. Keep singing. Sing even when no one says you should. Love, Grandma. I didn't give it to Daniel. I mailed it directly. A week later, a small envelope appeared in my mailbox. Glitter stickers on the corners, blocky handwriting. Dear Grandma, I put your letter on my desk. I sing every day. Even if Mom says, shh, when are you coming over? I can make you toast like you make me. Love, Lily P.S. Henry says hi, but he didn't want to write. He's lazy. I laughed, truly laughed, for the first time in a while. Not bitterly, not politely, just real, light, whole, and I didn't feel the need to reply right away. Lily had written from the heart. She didn't ask for anything except presence, and that, perhaps, was the only invitation I still recognized. I began to feel something shift, not back to the old way, but to a version where I could choose my terms, where my absence was no longer a threat, but a fact, something settled, quiet, irrefutable. Jenna didn't reach out. I didn't expect her to. Daniel texted once more, a photo of the kids in Halloween costumes. No caption, just the image. I looked at it and smiled. And I did not reply. Not because I was punishing anyone, but because silence this time was mine to keep. In the hallway of my flat, I'd hung a framed print. A quiet forest path with a woman walking alone into the distance. Below it, a small plaque I'd bought from a gift shop. Peace is not the absence of noise. It's the presence of yourself. This was not a dramatic victory. It was the echo left in a room when someone finally stops waiting to be called back in, and no one rushes to fill the quiet. And that quiet, finally, belongs to you. A few days after Lily's letter, Daniel called. Not a text, not an email, a phone call, the kind that now feels almost old-fashioned. The screen lit up with his name while I was folding laundry, and for a moment, I let it ring twice before answering. Hi, Mom. Hi, Daniel. A pause. Then, do you have a minute? I do. He exhaled, that nervous kind of breath, like someone about to walk into a room where they aren't sure if they're welcome. I wanted to ask something, he said, not about coming back or watching the kids or anything like that. Okay. He hesitated. Would you meet me for coffee? I was quiet, then said, yes. When? Tomorrow morning? There's that place near Lily's school. Quiet, I think. I know it. I'll be there at 10? All right. We hung up, and I sat still for a moment, my hands resting on the folded dish towel in my lap. The hum of the refrigerator filled the room. There was no anxiety in me, but neither was there expectation. I didn't hope for apology or clarity or some grand gesture. I simply wanted to see how the conversation would sound now that I had changed my seat at the table. The next morning, the cafe was half full, with the comforting clink of porcelain and low murmurs. Daniel was already there, a coffee in front of him. He stood when he saw me, something he hadn't done in years. Hi, he said again, softer. I sat. Good morning. He waited until my tea arrived before speaking again. I wanted to talk because I don't think I ever really did. Not in a real way. Not with you. I sipped slowly. Go on. He looked older to me than I remembered. Or maybe it was the first time I saw him without the blur of closeness. His eyes were tired but sincere. When Dad died, I didn't know how to help. I thought bringing you in, giving you space in our house, was helping. But it wasn't really a conversation. It was just logistics. You were trying to do the right thing, I said. I know that. But we made it about convenience. You were part of everything, but always in the corners. I didn't see it until you weren't there anymore. I didn't fill the silence. I let it settle. I miss you, he said. The kids miss you, but I understand that what we gave you wasn't what you needed or deserved. I didn't leave to punish you, I said gently. I left because I realized I was disappearing. I didn't even notice it was happening until I was already mostly gone. He nodded slowly. Jenna doesn't know what to say. She doesn't have to say anything. Some distances aren't about blame. Lily asks about you a lot. I wrote her. She has it taped on her wall. That made something flutter in my chest. I don't know what's next, Daniel said, but I want to start doing better, not to fix anything, just to learn how to have you in our lives the way you want to be there. That's a good place to begin, I said. He didn't push, didn't beg me to return. He just sat there, letting the quiet do its work. It was the first time in a long time we'd shared silence that wasn't filled with expectation. When we stood to leave, he reached out and hugged me. Not tightly, not desperately, just enough. As I stepped out into the crisp air, I felt something inside me shift. Not backwards, not homeward, but outward. The next chapter wasn't about returning. It was about being met where I already stood. After the coffee meeting with Daniel, I didn't rush to follow up. There was no dramatic shift in our relationship, no sudden flood of messages or invitations, but something unspoken had changed. A door hadn't swung wide open, but it was no longer shut. That week, I returned to my routines. On Thursday, I went to the watercolor group and painted an entire landscape in pale blue. On Saturday, I helped a neighbor carry groceries up her steps. I filled a bowl with lemons, just because it made the kitchen look more hopeful. On Sunday evening, I received another envelope. Lily's handwriting again. Inside was a small folded drawing of two stick figures holding hands, one with glasses and gray curls, the other with a big toothy smile. Above it, Grandma's house. But it wasn't their house. It was mine. The window had my curtains. The porch had my rocking chair. It was the first time I'd been drawn into a scene that didn't place me in someone else's corner. That same night, I took out the postcard I had once left blank and scribbled on it in pencil. You don't have to return to the place you came from to care for what you left behind. I didn't send it. Instead, I taped it to the back of my closet door. In the days that followed, I began to feel the quiet not as an echo, but as something I had shaped. It was no longer absence, it was space. And into that space, I began to allow things that were mine by choice. I started volunteering at the local library on Tuesdays, shelving returns. I got a card with my own name on it, not attached to anyone else's address. I bought a set of glass jars and organized my spices. small things, but they belonged to me. Then one afternoon, my phone rang again. Not Daniel. Lily calling from his number. Grandma? Hi, love. I'm in a school play. I'm going to be a moon. A moon? I laughed. Yes, I wear a costume and glow. Can you come see me? I hesitated. I could hear Jenna in the background, asking who she was talking to. Let me talk to your dad, okay? Daniel came on. She really wants you there. So do I. You don't have to stay after, just come if you want. I said I'd think about it. That night, I sat at the table and thought about what care meant now. It wasn't making lunches or folding laundry. It wasn't slipping into the background so others could take center stage. It wasn't erasing myself for peace. It was showing up on my terms. So I went. I dressed in a soft navy sweater and sat in the third row of the elementary school auditorium. I didn't go backstage. I didn't bring gifts. But when the stage lights came up and Lily stepped out in a round costume painted silver and smiled straight into the crowd, I knew she had found me. Her hand waved. I waved back. Afterward, I slipped out quietly without waiting for the end of show shuffle. Daniel texted later that night. Thanks for coming. She was so happy. We were too. I replied, You're welcome. I was glad to see her shine. I didn't offer more. I didn't apologize for leaving early. Care, I realized, was not just about presence. It was about permission. To show up fully, to leave when needed, to return when ready, and to know that even when you don't belong to a household anymore, you can still belong to yourself. I turned out the light and slept without thinking of who might notice I was missing in the morning. Winter came slowly that year. The leaves had long since curled and fallen, but the cold didn't bite all at once. It arrived like most things in this new version of my life, gradually, with silence at its edges. On the morning of December 1st, I turned 70 and a half. There was no fanfare, no reminders circled on calendars, no banners or streamers, just a soft frost on the window pane, a quiet apartment, and the gentle clink of my teaspoon against the mug. I didn't tell anyone. That morning, I walked to the park with a small candle tucked inside my coat pocket. It was the same one I had placed on the bench weeks ago, during the late days of fall. This time, the air was sharper, the sky more silver than blue. Fewer people passed by. I reached the bench, my bench now, in a way, and sat for a moment. I lit the candle and let it flicker in the breeze. A man passing by with his dog gave a curious glance. "Whose birthday?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "Someone who's not waiting for an invitation anymore." He chuckled as he walked on. "Good answer." I stayed until the flame blew out on its own. I didn't cry. I didn't wish. I simply sat. That evening, I made myself a modest dinner: roasted chicken, a handful of green beans, a slice of bread with real butter. I poured a glass of wine and put on a record Harold once loved, the kind that scratched slightly before the music began. And I didn't invite anyone, not because I was angry, because I didn't need to be seen to feel whole. The apartment was quiet, just the sound of the needle spinning, the low hum of the heater, the soft wind outside. I placed a clean postcard on the table, beside the photo of Harold and me. On it, I wrote, I turned 70 in a room no one entered. I turned 70 and a half with no cake. And somehow, that second day meant more, because I chose it, because I made it, because it was mine. I didn't sign it. I didn't mail it. Some things are written just to be kept. That postcard now lives inside a drawer next to my kitchen towels, a quiet reminder that not all milestones come with applause. Sometimes the most meaningful victories are invisible, not because no one noticed, but because no one had to. I no longer hosted dinners, but I visited when I wished. I no longer folded anyone's laundry, but I mended a friend's scarf and didn't ask for it back. I no longer lived in the house where I raised my son, but I lit a candle in the place where I raised myself. This, I learned, is the real gift. Not that you are finally seen, but that you stop needing permission to be